In the early 1940s, as the Second World War consumed Europe in fire and steel, the skies over Germany became the most dangerous place on Earth. Before the United States entered the war, Britain had already learned through blood and ruin that daylight bombing was nearly suicidal. Yet when America joined the fight in 1942, the U.S. Army Air Forces believed they could change the rules. They claimed that with discipline, advanced technology, and courage, their flying fortresses could strike with surgical precision, destroying only military targets and sparing civilians. That idealistic dream would soon collide with the brutal reality of modern warfare. The first American bombers that took off from bases in England, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses, gleamed with optimism. They were mighty machines, bristling with machine guns and armor, each one carrying 10 men and thousands of pounds of bombs. Their targets were strategic: factories, rail yards, oil refineries, and aircraft plants deep inside occupied Europe. The mission was to cripple the Nazi war machine, to bring Germany's industry to its knees, and to win the war through air power alone. But from the very beginning, the results were devastatingly inaccurate. In the bitter cold at 20,000 feet, bombers faced winds that shifted by the second, altitudes that froze instruments solid, and anti-aircraft guns that filled the sky with exploding steel. Even with careful planning, bomb after bomb missed its mark. Investigations later revealed that in early 1943, only 1 in 5 bombs landed within 1,000 feet of its intended target. Entire waves of aircraft would drop tons of explosives on empty fields or quiet villages miles away. For the crews risking their lives, it was heartbreaking. For the commanders in charge, it was alarming. Every mission was a gamble, flying through flak so thick it looked like black clouds. Pilots watched planes disintegrate in midair. Engines caught fire, parachutes bloomed in the sky like white petals of death. In just the first months of bombing campaigns over occupied France and Germany, losses were staggering. The 8th Air Force, which led the daylight raids from England, suffered casualty rates so high that the odds of surviving a full tour were worse than those of frontline infantry. The brave men inside the bombers, the navigators, bombardiers, and gunners, began to wonder if their sacrifices were even making a difference. At high altitude, visibility was often terrible. Bombardiers struggled to see through thick cloud layers and smoke, while German defenders grew more sophisticated in concealing their cities. To make matters worse, the airmen were operating at the limits of their machines. Temperatures could plunge to 60 degrees below zero, freezing exposed skin in seconds. Oxygen masks stiffened, hydraulic lines cracked, and gun turrets jammed. Every second in the air was a fight not just against the enemy, but against nature itself. Reports coming back from reconnaissance flights painted a grim picture. Many targets showed little or no damage after costly raids. At times, thousands of bombs would land so far from their intended factories that the results could not be called precision at all. This was not the clean, efficient warfare that U.S. strategists had promised. Instead, it was chaos from 20,000 feet. Inside briefing rooms across England, frustration boiled over. Commanders of the 8th Air Force demanded answers. General Irac Eaker, who led the American bombing offensive in Europe, faced growing pressure from Washington to prove that daylight precision bombing could work. If it failed, the U.S. would be forced to adopt Britain's strategy of nighttime area bombing, which meant accepting widespread civilian casualties, something American doctrine had sworn to avoid. The root of the crisis lay in both ambition and technology. The theory behind precision bombing was sound. In calm conditions, a skilled bombardier could use advanced sights and mathematics to hit a target with astonishing accuracy. But over enemy territory, theory vanished in the smoke. The slightest change in wind speed, a burst of flak, or a moment of evasive flying could throw off a bomb's trajectory by hundreds of yards. The crews began to joke grimly that they could hit anything they aimed at, as long as it was the wrong city. Yet amid the disillusionment, a quiet hope began to emerge. Word spread of a secret device, a mechanical miracle said to make bombers as accurate as artillery, It was called the Norden Bombsight. Designed by a Dutch engineer and guarded under strict secrecy, it was said to allow a skilled bombardier to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Many believed it could turn the tide of the war. To those who had watched their comrades vanish in flame and smoke, the promise of such accuracy sounded almost divine. As the war raged on, engineers and scientists back home worked tirelessly to deliver on the promise of accuracy. In secret workshops and test ranges, they refined gyroscopes, optical lenses, and autopilot systems that would guide the bombers to their targets. They believed technology could achieve what courage alone could not: control over chaos. The fate of the American air war in Europe would soon rest on one extraordinary invention. That invention, born of ingenuity and desperation, would come to symbolize both the brilliance and the hubris of wartime science. It would give crews new confidence and command new secrecy. It would also expose the dangerous gap between what machines could promise and what men could achieve in the skies above a burning world. As the 8th Air Force prepared for its next wave of missions, every bombardier was trained on the Norden Bombsight, the device that was said to make war scientific. But the truth, as history would soon show, was far more complicated. In the late 1930s, as the winds of war began to rise across Europe, the United States was still clinging to the hope that technology could make war more humane, more precise, and perhaps even more moral. Among the many inventions born from that belief, none inspired more faith than a strange-looking mechanical device, the Norden Bombsight. It was a polished metal sphere filled with gyros, mirrors, gears, and levers, capable of calculating the perfect moment to release a bomb. To many in the military, it was not just a machine, it was a miracle. The story of the Norden Bombsight began long before the first American bombers flew over Europe. It started with a Dutch engineer named Carl Lucas Norden, a quiet, brilliant man who had emigrated to the United States in the early 20th century. Norden was fascinated by the challenge of hitting a moving target from a moving aircraft. In an age before digital computers, his mind worked like a precision instrument, crafting mechanical solutions to mathematical problems. By the late 1920s, his design for a stabilized optical bombsight had caught the attention of the U.S. Navy and later the Army Air Corps. Norden's invention promised to revolutionize aerial warfare. The device used gyroscopes to keep itself level, even when the airplane was buffeted by wind and turbulence. Inside, a complex arrangement of gears and mirrors allowed the bombardier to input data such as airspeed, altitude, and wind direction. Once these factors were set, the bombsight could compute the exact moment of release, supposedly allowing bombs to hit their targets with astonishing accuracy. The promise was seductive, a scientific solution to the chaos of war. By the time the Second World War began, the Norden Bombsight had become one of America's most closely guarded military secrets. Every bombardier who trained on it had to take a solemn oath to protect its secrets with his life. Manuals were locked away in safes. The bombsights themselves were transported in armed convoys, their lenses covered and mechanisms secured. If a bomber was shot down, the crew was ordered to destroy the device before capture. The U.S. government treated the Norden Bombsight as if it were more valuable than the bombs it guided. In newspapers and propaganda films, the bombsight became a symbol of American genius. It was portrayed as the miracle eye of the bomber, a technological marvel that could see through clouds, smoke, and distance. Public confidence in its power grew so strong that it shaped the very strategy of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Military planners became convinced that with the Norden, they could strike only the vital organs of the enemy, factories, power plants, and rail hubs, without harming innocent civilians. It was this belief that gave birth to the doctrine of daylight precision bombing. During the early years of the war, engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to refine the Norden. They paired it with another groundbreaking technology, the Sperry autopilot system. Together, the two devices allowed a bomber to lock in on a target and maintain a steady course while the bombardier took control of the aircraft for the final moments of the bombing run. In theory, it transformed the airplane into a giant precision instrument, part man, part machine, united in a single deadly purpose. Back in the United States, factories in New York and New Jersey produced the bombsight under strict security. Thousands of workers toiled in assembly lines, often unaware of the true nature of what they were building. The government spent billions of dollars in 1940s currency to mass-produce and distribute the Norden across every bomber in the fleet. It became standard issue for aircraft like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-20 for Liberator, both central to the 8th Air Force operations over Europe. To the men who trained on it, the Norden represented hope. Bombardiers were taught that with skill and focus, they could hit a target as small as a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Many believed it. They practiced endlessly, mastering the delicate balance of mathematics and motion. In training ranges across the American Midwest, practice bombs landed with impressive accuracy, confirming the legend. It seemed that technology had finally conquered the age-old problem of precision from the sky. But beyond the optimism, darker undercurrents were already stirring. German intelligence had learned of the bombsight's existence, and spies were eager to steal its secrets. In one of the lesser-known espionage stories of the war, a naturalized American named Herman Lang, who had once worked for Norden, smuggled drawings of the bombsight to Nazi Germany years before the war began. His betrayal, uncovered later by the FBI, meant that the Germans had partial knowledge of the Norden's design long before American bombers first crossed the English Channel. Still, the U.S. military pressed forward, convinced that the Norden would justify their faith in daylight bombing. Generals like Henry Hop Arnold and Karl Spaatz championed the technology as the key to victory. They believed that American air power, guided by the Norden's precision, could cripple the German war machine without the massive civilian casualties that had scarred earlier wars. It was a bold vision, one that placed immense responsibility on the young men flying through enemy fire at 20,000 feet. When the 8th Air Force began its first major raids over Europe, each B-17 carried a Norden bombsight like a sacred relic. Before every mission, bombardiers handled it with reverence. They knew the device had cost millions, that it represented the best that science could offer. In briefing rooms, officers reminded them that they held the key to victory. One sight, one bomb, one target. They were told, "You are the surgeon of the sky." As 1943 dawned, the war in Europe intensified. American bombers were striking deeper into occupied territory, testing both their courage and their faith in Norden's promise. The propaganda at home declared that precision bombing was working, that America's mechanical eye could deliver justice from the heavens. But on the front lines, where flak and fighters ruled the air, crews were beginning to discover that reality was far less predictable. The Norden bombsight was indeed a marvel of engineering, but it depended on conditions that seldom existed in combat. It needed clear skies, steady flight, and calm winds. In the real world of aerial warfare, where every mission was a dance with death, those conditions almost never came. The ideal of precision would soon collide with the chaos of war, and what began as a dream of accuracy would turn into one of the most sobering lessons of the entire conflict. The next phase of the air war would test the Norden bombsight to its breaking point. The raids over Germany would grow larger, deadlier, and more desperate. The crews would discover that technology, no matter how advanced, could not overcome the storm of war. The story of the Norden would soon shift from triumph to tragedy, from the dream of precision to the hard truth of human limitation. In the summer of 1943, the skies over Germany turned into a proving ground for America's greatest technological promise and its greatest illusion. The Norden bombsight had been hailed as the key to victory, a machine so advanced that it could bring mathematical precision to the chaos of war. But as the 8th Air Force began striking deeper into the heart of Nazi industry, that dream began to unravel under fire, smoke, and blood. By mid-1943, American bomber formations were launching some of the most ambitious daylight raids in history. The targets were factories producing ball bearings, aircraft components, and fuel, the lifeblood of the German war machine. The concept of precision bombing demanded that these targets be hit directly, crippling production while sparing civilians. Every mission was planned down to the second, every route mapped to the inch. And yet, once the formations crossed into enemy airspace, the perfect symmetry of those plans dissolved almost instantly. German air defenses were ruthless. Radar stations picked up incoming bombers hundreds of miles away, guiding waves of Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf fighters straight toward them. Anti-aircraft guns, known as flak batteries, filled the sky with exploding shells. The bombers flew in tight formation, box upon box of aircraft, because only by combining their firepower could they hope to survive. But that same formation flying created a deadly paradox. To stay alive, they had to maneuver, and every maneuver threw off the bombardier's aim. The Norden Bombsight, for all its brilliance, depended on stability. Its gyroscopes and gears could calculate the perfect release point only if the aircraft flew straight and level for the final seconds of the bombing run. But flying straight and level over a target meant flying directly into a storm of anti-aircraft fire. Every instinct in a pilot's body screamed to take evasive action, but the doctrine of precision bombing demanded otherwise. "Hold steady," the bombardier would shout, "just a few more seconds." Those seconds often meant the difference between life and death. The illusion of accuracy shattered most dramatically during the twin raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg in August 1943. These missions were designed to cripple Germany's ball-bearing production and aircraft manufacturing, vital to the Nazi war effort. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses set out from England in broad daylight, loaded with bombs and faith in the Norden. The plan was bold: strike to key targets deep inside Bavaria, then fly onto bases in North Africa. What followed became one of the most harrowing episodes in the history of aerial warfare. Over the course of several hours, the bombers were battered by waves of German fighters. The Luftwaffe attacked relentlessly, slashing through the formations with devastating precision. Planes exploded mid-air, crews bailed out over enemy territory, and yet the surviving aircraft pressed on. By the time they reached their targets, many formations were in chaos. Bombardiers straining through the Norden's eyepiece saw not clear targets but clouds, smoke, and confusion. In theory, the Norden bombsight could guide a bomb within a few dozen feet of its target. In practice, the reality was far worse. Winds at high altitude shifted constantly, scattering bomb patterns over wide areas. The German defenses had learned to camouflage factories and deploy smoke generators that blanketed entire cities. On radar screens back in England, analysts later saw that many bombs had missed by miles. Some fell on open fields, others on residential areas that were never intended targets. The missions were supposed to cripple German production. Instead, they crippled American air power. When the surviving crews finally returned, the 8th Air Force had lost 60 bombers and hundreds of men, one of the highest loss rates of the entire war. The carnage shocked the American public and rattled military leadership. For all the promise of the Norden bombsight, the hard truth was impossible to ignore. Under combat conditions, the U.S. Air Force was not 3 times more accurate. It was barely accurate at all. Historians later calculated that during 1943, less than 20% of bombs dropped by the 8th Air Force landed within 1,000 feet of their target. The rest scattered far beyond the intended area, rendering many missions strategically ineffective. Precision, it seemed, had been more of a slogan than a reality. The Norden bombsight, for all its mechanical genius, could not account for weather, human error, or the sheer terror of combat. Crews began to lose faith in the device. Bombardiers joked bitterly that the Norden could hit a pickle barrel if the pickle barrel was the size of a football field. Still, they followed orders because there was no alternative. The doctrine of daylight precision bombing remained the cornerstone of American strategy, and every failed mission only reinforced the desperate belief that success was just one perfect raid away. At the same time, intelligence officers began to realize that the Germans had adapted quickly. The Luftwaffe placed decoy targets, built fake factories, and scattered their industrial production across the countryside. Even when American bombs did hit true, the results were often less catastrophic than expected. German engineers repaired damage swiftly, and the Nazi war machine rolled on. Inside bomber briefings, morale began to waver. Some commanders questioned whether the Norden was truly capable of what had been promised. Others insisted that the problem lay not in the device, but in the conditions of war itself. How could any machine, no matter how advanced, maintain precision in a sky filled with death? As autumn of 1943 arrived, the 8th Air Force continued to press deeper into Germany, flying missions over Bremen, Hamburg, and Berlin. The aircrews faced not only flak and fighters, but also the growing realization that they were being sent into hell for results that rarely matched the cost. The vision of clean, surgical warfare was fading fast. Yet amid the chaos, there were moments of courage and brilliance. Some crews managed astonishing feats, striking precise targets even under impossible conditions. Their success came not from technology alone, but from sheer determination, teamwork, and experience hard-won through suffering. These men proved that human skill could sometimes bridge the gap between theory and reality. But such victories were rare, and the cost remained staggering. By the end of 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces were forced to confront a grim truth: precision bombing, as originally conceived, was failing. The Norden Bombsight had not delivered the miracle it promised. It could not compensate for human fear, mechanical failure, or the unpredictable fury of war. The strategy that had been meant to shorten the conflict was instead consuming men and machines at a terrifying rate. Something had to change. The lessons learned from Schweinfurt and Regensburg would soon reshape the entire doctrine of American air warfare. New tactics would emerge, tactics that acknowledged the limits of machines and the resilience of human courage. The age of blind faith in technology was ending. In its place, a new understanding was about to be born. In the winter of 1944, as Europe froze under the iron grip of war, the United States Army Air Forces faced a reckoning. The dream of precision bombing, the idea that technology and discipline could bring scientific accuracy to destruction, had been tested in the crucible of combat and found wanting. The Norden Bombsight, once hailed as the secret weapon that would win the war, had met its limits in the chaos of the sky. The losses over Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and countless other missions had proven that no device, no matter how sophisticated, could fully master the unpredictable violence of aerial warfare. But from failure came adaptation, from suffering came transformation. By early 1944, American commanders recognized that to survive, they needed new tactics, better coordination, and crucially, protection from above. The long-range escort fighter, a concept once considered impractical, became the missing piece of the precision puzzle. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang, with its extended range and deadly agility, changed everything. For the first time, bombers could rely on fighter escorts all the way to their targets deep inside Germany and back again. The skies that had once been ruled by the Luftwaffe began to tilt in favor of the Allies. With this new protection, formations could fly tighter and steadier, giving bombardiers a better chance to make their aim count. Accuracy improved not because the Norden became more powerful, but because the conditions for its use became more survivable. The lesson was clear: Technology could not function in isolation. The Norden Bombsight was only as good as the men who used it, and the support that kept them alive long enough to do so. As the war intensified, American tactics evolved beyond the rigid doctrine of perfect precision. Commanders like General Jimmy Doolittle introduced more flexible strategies, allowing bombers to target industrial zones, oil refineries, and transportation networks rather than single factories. Instead of chasing mathematical perfection, the goal shifted to sustained strategic impact. The result was a more pragmatic, and ultimately more effective, bombing campaign. The turning point came in the spring of 1944, during Operation Point Blank, the massive Allied effort to cripple the German aircraft industry ahead of the D-Day invasion. This time, the raids worked. The combination of relentless pressure, improved escort coverage, and growing Allied air superiority finally began to break the Luftwaffe's back. For the first time, the vision of air power as a decisive force seemed attainable. Yet even then, the precision that American leaders had once promised was still more illusion than fact. Aerial photography after major raids revealed how often entire cities had been damaged when only one target had been intended. Bombing patterns spread across industrial and civilian areas alike. The war that had begun with promises of surgical strikes had, by 1945, devolved into something far more devastating. Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin were reduced to smoldering ruins. Firestorms consumed tens of thousands of lives. Though many of those attacks were led by the British Royal Air Force under a different doctrine, American raids contributed their own share of destruction. The Norden Bombsight had not made war cleaner. It had not made it more humane. But it had shaped a generation's faith in the power of engineering to solve even the most moral of dilemmas. Its existence justified an entire military philosophy, one that would echo far beyond the Second World War, into Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, wherever nations tried to make bombing a precise and ethical instrument. After the war, when the dust settled and the factories of Europe lay silent, the true story of the Norden Bombsight emerged. Engineers, analysts, and historians began to examine what had gone wrong. They discovered that under perfect test conditions, the bombsight could indeed achieve extraordinary accuracy, sometimes within a few dozen feet. But such perfection was rare even in peacetime. In combat, the factors that affected bomb trajectory were countless: air turbulence, bomb release delay, variations in altitude, and even the temperature of the atmosphere. The smallest error multiplied over miles of altitude could send a bomb hundreds of feet astray. Despite its shortcomings, the Norden Bombsight became a legend, a symbol of American ingenuity, of faith in technology, and of the strange intersection between science and war. When Carl Norden himself was later asked about his creation, he expressed deep sorrow that it had been used for destruction. He had imagined it as a tool to prevent war by making it too precise, too terrible to risk. Instead, it had become one of the most destructive instruments in human history. The secrecy surrounding the bombsight continued long after the war ended. Thousands of devices were collected, dismantled, or stored away in classified warehouses. It was not until the late 1950s that the details of its design became public knowledge. By then, jet aircraft and radar-guided bombs had already rendered it obsolete. Yet its legacy endured, embedded in the DNA of modern warfare. The Norden Bombsight laid the foundation for the precision-guided weapons of the future: laser targeting systems, GPS bombs, and drone strikes, all of them born from the same desire to control the uncontrollable. The irony, however, remains: the more humanity tries to make war precise, the more it must confront the fundamental truth that war itself defies precision. The skies over Europe in the 1940s taught that lesson in fire and smoke. Thousands of young airmen, who once believed they were fighting a clean and calculated war, discovered that courage, not calculation, was what truly mattered. Their struggle, their sacrifice, and their faith in the machines that guided them became part of one of the most profound stories in military history. Today, historians and engineers alike still study the Norden Bombsight, not only for its technical brilliance, but also for the questions it raises about the limits of technology in the face of human complexity. Its polished lenses and precise gears remind us that even the most advanced instruments are powerless against uncertainty, fear, and chaos. In museums across the world, a few of the surviving bomb sites sit behind glass, their metal dulled by age, their purpose long past. Yet when you look into their optical eyepieces, you can almost imagine the view those bombardiers saw: the endless sky, the target far below, the trembling hands adjusting a machine that promised perfection in an imperfect world. It is a haunting reminder of how belief in progress can both inspire and blind us. The strange tactic that made US bombers 3 times more accurate was not just a matter of mathematics or machinery. It was the story of men who dared to believe that precision could bring order to war. It was the story of courage in the face of chaos, of faith in science amidst destruction, and of lessons written not in ink but in smoke across the skies of Europe.